Good morning. Thank you very much, Sri N.K. Singh, for having me over here this morning. Also, thank you very much for Jean-Pierre Lando to be here and the eminent gathering before me. At a time when the world is seeing so many major changes. Changes may not be the right word. Churning probably it is. Because when you change something, you probably know where you're going. And when you change something, you also probably can see a path towards some destination. But the churn that is happening now is the kind of thing on which no two persons can agree as to what it's going to result in. So when we are meeting today at a time when not one churn but several churn all simultaneously happening, I see more a duty and responsibility for all of us even before we lay down what we want to do. And the duty or the responsibility, I would think, is to, in this circumstance, what is the kind of path or what is the kind of adjustment that the global economic order, big canvas, but global economic order will have to ready itself for. And since we are sitting in India and talking about it, specific things that India at this stage will have to do, keeping the future generations in mind, and particularly with the comfort that there is a government which is receptive to inputs coming from different experts, scholars, observers of the economy, and so on. So, a government which is ready to listen within India, but globally, because the challenges are having spillover across the board, important to have good outcomes from this kind of 2 or 3 days session where great minds are putting into the thought process, their own inputs. We need to have some thoughts to be shared globally as well. So I'm setting before you my little expectation from this 3-day session. But I'll also place before you those concerns which are in my mind even as I talk. Globally, we don't need to hesitate any longer to say the multilateral institutions, not just banks, development banks, but even otherwise, whether it's the UN, the Security Council, or any other, WHO, WTO, are less than effective from where they were made into institutions, from at the point when they were brought in. The level of effectiveness by their interventions that they were to bring in the global scenario is today at less than ideal position. Now, because they've become less effective, we've reached a stage where what we took for granted is no longer to be taken for granted. We thought that if there is a disruption somewhere, the WTO would come into play. If there is a huge big pandemic, the WHO would come to play. Similarly, in developmental agenda of different countries at different levels of development, there would be timely and periodic interventions with which you will see some change with the spirit of inclusiveness so that less developed countries will also have some traction towards achieving their aspirations. But we find that less effective in all across the board in all these institutions. So that's one factor that we keep before us. And in that, I'll begin by thanking Larry Summers and N.K. Singh for having come up with some kind of a document which all of us can use, in which I can see Nick Stern and others here, who have all participated to, in a very short period of time, apply their mind and come up with something which the G20 has appreciated, welcomed, and now it has tasked one of its own group to go into how the recommendations can be put to action. So the Brazilian presidency next is going to have to take that task on. But with the G20 members all being on board in one voice, you have a good task cut out for the next presidency. But that underlines the fact that everyone agreed that indeed these institutions will have to be reformed. And here, obviously, it will confine itself to the development banks and possibly have some kind of implication on the WTO. But beyond that, other institutions and their reforms will also have to be considered, but that's for a different forum, different set of people to handle. The second I would like to highlight is globally the strategic blocks that have been since the Cold War days, which gave a sense of being together for one set of group and the other set of group and a third set of group and so on, the non-aligned movement or anything else like that globally, now are reshaping themselves. They are no longer in the same frame in which they were earlier. Newer entrants are getting into one block. Some entrants are from totally ungrouped formations earlier, or people are falling out of a group. And in this, what is the impact for economy? Yes, certainly it has an impact because the supply chains get influenced because of that. The third I would like to highlight is in a world, let's say the 20th century, which saw sporadic wars at different places and which could probably be contained or resolve itself. Today, you have persisting 2 wars and 1 war which has broken out recently. 3 wars, all happening simultaneously and happening in places from where supply chains are very severely impacted. Source of food grains being impacted, transshipment of goods being impacted. So you have the wars also today for us to bear the brunt of. We've still not recovered from COVID. No, I'm not talking about the Indian economy, but globally, we've still not recovered from what COVID hit us and where we were before and where are we now. And in some countries, when the recovery is happening speedily, you still have some constraints in restoring normalcy. So you have that problem also to factor in. Then you have this issue of a certain skepticism or pessimism, which had set in saying now globalization is at its end. Today you have conversations which say re-globalization is happening. I would think that is possibly the one to be considered, because I also link it to the earlier argument that I put before you about how strategic blocks are reshaping themselves. So if re-globalization is happening, it's also happening in that context. So who's grouping with who's left a group, and who is remaining outside of all these groups or forming new groups. Enough of parameters for us to take on board, but yet, yes, that's the reality. So re-globalization, but with different shape and color and flavor, I suppose. Another factor which, as great minds, you would want to take on board, which is an obvious, and it is the big elephant in the room, and that is the impact of terrorism across the globe. It's no longer an occasional attack, or it's no longer just one region which is repeatedly under the terrorism target. It's anybody, anywhere, single or well organized. And that level of uncertainty and that level of risk which comes into business decision making or investments is going to be a permanent uncertainty and high cost risk. So businesses can no longer be attracted by just policies or by just openness of an economy. They're also going to factor in the magnet which is going to attract terrorist targeting. And I say it in so many words and also in such descriptive words, only because what drives a particular terrorism is still very fluid. Is it ideology? Is it religion? Is it one ethnic against another ethnic? It's no longer matters to be discussed between authorities. It's anybody's game for anywhere. So the risk that investors, the risk that the business will have to factor into their decision making is very strongly got to be influenced by the impact of global terror. Fragmentation as a result. You can always link it to so many different points that I had already mentioned. And as a result, what is that fragmentation going to do to your plans of globalization? What thoughts have you got on that? The globe now, or all of us now, will also have to think about where do we source our food from? To be sure. What quantity of food from an area that if it gets hit, we can look at a different destination from where we can draw it. Do we need to draw food from so many different sources, or can you have food security because you've planned your agriculture well? At least to bring in self-sufficiency for your respective country's consumption. And even though well endowed, Africa and all the countries, each one of them inclusive, I've been thinking about the 50 plus, food security is a major issue for them. They had, and rightly, they had comfortably depended on 1, 2, or 3 sources for their main staples. But that was what was hit when war came. So not speaking just for India, the global food security issue, and it's ironic that we're talking about food security in 21st century, but global food security issues are definitely got to be thought out, not from the global links that you have. Yes, that comfort is there, but the risks are also high. So at least for some staples and essentials, there should be a regional balance that you need, if not a country-wide balance. Within a region that you can depend and have some sufficiency and surety that your food basket will be always ready for the table. If you depend on the global sourcing, you also will have to factor in the global risks. And can any one country or any one region afford to have food at that risk level? I think this is one thing on which your 3-day conclave should apply its mind and see how best we can have some kind of a template that food doesn't become an instrument in war or disruption. So should fertilizer, so should fuel. But when I start talking about fuel, it has an impact on climate financing, climate management, mitigating of climate risks, and everything else. And that's a very big and complex area on which any number of debate is required, and outputs will be keenly watched. I will take only one of the complex, layered debate that climate-related issues have, and we have no answers on that one, for instance, as an example, but there can be many more within the climate issue itself. The transitional energy. We've been talking about transition now for possibly a decade. Till today, no one is able to tell us for sure which is that source of energy which can be comfortably used for transition. There was a time, and I'll be unfair to use this expression, but I'll still use it. There was a time when deceptively all of us believed that natural gas can stand by us. The uncertainties which got attached to that debate of natural gas, the price speculation, the supply difficulties, all have made natural gas go to the background rather than be on the center and front. We have still no answers on what that transition is going to be. And since we don't have answers, and since there doesn't seem to be a possibility in the next few years that we'll get one, an unhappy situation of many countries getting back to coal, at least to meet their base energy requirements, is now happening. And no one of us have any moral authority to raise a voice against it. Moving to coal, at a time when these uncertainties are before every country, not just one, is just not going to help. But that's the reality, and you're going to have the next COP meeting in the Middle East. So investments to be guided towards the transitional energy source are being delayed. And because of that delay, no country is sure as to which direction, no guidance, forward guidance is provided in this. But we're having COP after COP, and nationally determined commitments are being fulfilled to some extent, but the path towards a complete shift from fossil to renewable is still complicated. Only a few days ago, and I was exchanging some thoughts with my chief economic advisor, only a few days ago, the Financial Times had a full-page narrative on France and Germany, neighbors, European Union members. France and Germany not being sure where they are on the nuclear energy. Not an insignificant one-page item from Financial Times. So there is an urgent need for us to sit up and see what is this climate action going to be if you have no clue on where the transition energy is going to come from. The second thing I would again highlight on the climate-related matters is the climate finance. I stand here as a proud member of the Government of India under Prime Minister Modi, which spent its own resource to fulfill its nationally determined commitments, which was given in Paris. It spent its own resource. And anyone who would raise an eyebrow saying you should obviously spend, will have to also think that emerging market countries, developing countries, low-income countries cannot afford that kind of big money for climate financing. And we've done it for one set of nationally determined commitments given in Paris, and we've moved over to speak about Panchamrit in Scotland for the next meeting, and we've enhanced our commitments. Just imagine for a country like India, where its developmental goals and aspirations are still being met. And now in the last 9 years, I can say it's being met at a speed never seen before in India. Whether you're building your roads or ports or airports, and top class at that. With all these demands and to take care of a bulk of population which still requires a hand-holding, where will the money come from? And I can be that one single country which, if it doesn't contribute to this quick transition towards renewable energy, the global targets will also get hit because we are a large country, large population, dependent on fuel because it is now that they're coming up in their lives. But can it be held against me then? So the climate finance business, and I'm glad that is one of the things which got covered in the Larry Summers N.K. Singh report, because that third window talking about global public infrastructure, which includes climate considerations, is a very important fact which we cannot shy away from addressing. And there is some kind of light being thrown on that subject, which again, all of us would want to look at. India's emphasis on digitalization. With the digital economy, we are just opening up, bringing in greater transparency, and there has not been a more powerful tool in empowering citizens. Empowering citizens who otherwise would have remained very far away from developmental aspirations being met. That digitalization has brought in more than 50 governmental schemes directly to their bank accounts. And only a few days ago when I was reviewing the Jan Dhan accounts, you'll be happy to know that's the biggest instrument of bringing financial inclusion in this country. And that in the last 6 months had 50 crore more accounts being brought in, newer accounts being brought in. And a scheme, when it was launched in 2014, people were passing snide remarks to say, oh no, these are zero balance accounts. Who's going to fund them? Who's going to service them? Where will they have any balance in their account? This will be a burden on the public sector banks. Today, I'm happy to say, just these Jan Dhan accounts have a balance in total among all of them over 2 lakh crores of Indian rupees. 2.05 lakh crores is the balance in these accounts. And because of this account, this set of Jan Dhan account, during COVID, the poorest of poor people had money sent to their account from the government, and particularly we had chosen to have women account holders for delivering money during the COVID lockdown so that they will have some money in their hand for buying medicines or buying essentials for the home. Food, of course, grains were given free of cost. So digitalization today has also made businesses do rapid growth in their business, whether they are small street vendors or small petty shopkeepers. The transition there and adaptability of technology within the Indian citizens is high at something like 68% compared to the global average of 38%. So it is paying the system because we've digitized it and we'll continue doing it. Two thoughts which I leave with you before I conclude. This is an era, I would think, and of course, the Honorable Prime Minister speaks about it, saying we are going towards 2047. We want India's generation at India 100 see a better India, developed India, an India which you can stand up and say we've come out of colonialism and come out well ahead and come out in shining colors. And that's the aspiration for our youth today who want to see better India because they're willing to work towards it. Now, in that, the big thing that, along with what you can expect from the government, is a thought on responsibility. the citizens' duties. We are emphasizing that each of us look at India as our motherland and we need to contribute. All of us will have to do a little bit. And there is a lot of sense of responsibility with which our young are coming out to say, we'll do this towards our village, we'll do this towards our school, we'll do this towards our health systems and so on. And that is where I think the spirit is seen among startups who are coming up with in situ solutions for bettering the fundamental infrastructure which is around us. The next thought and the last thought is in the decision making. We are conscious, and this of course will be a subject of your discussion, I suppose, in the matters related to macroeconomic stability of the country, responsibility with which we deal with our fiscal and also the fiscal management and so on. For every decision that we take today, we are conscious of what burden it is going to leave the next generations. It's very easy to be profligate and burden the coming generations with the debt that you will be sitting with. We are conscious of the debt of Government of India today. Compared to many others, it might not be as high as it is. But even there, we are consciously looking at experiments in different parts of the world. And again, some of the data about some emerging market countries, about how they are managing their debt, is something which is actively in our minds in the ministry. And we are looking at ways in which we can bring down the overall debt. And we are, I'm sure, going to be very successful in that because our efforts are very well streamlined to meet India's aspirational requirements, but deal with it with a sense of responsibility so that our next coming generations don't feel the burden that government has left on them. Whereas equally, we need to be sure that money spent has its right returns. So the bang for the buck argument is also something which we've kept in our mind from COVID days. And that is why we took the route to spending public money in creating public infrastructure so that we have better returns for every rupee spent, rather than go by the temptation which was being periodically thrown at us, saying, give money in the hands of the people, they are suffering. We didn't. We dared not to do it. But I think some principles of economics stand the test of time. And that is, when you spend money in capital expenditure and with the digitized approach, you are remaining transparent. People can see where that money is going. There are no kickbacks. Public spent money gets its return. And therefore, you can stand up and tell to the next generation that we've been careful not to burden you. So with these words, I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.